Hey cats, what's happening? You know, yesterday V and I went on a little ride, went to a little biker party, and they had some events there to include slow races, which I registered for and entered in, and I did pretty good until the bike choked on me. It coughed and lurched, and I had to put my foot down and I was disqualified. So that being said, they said, well, loop around and park over here. So I went to loop around, and the bike just started running worse and worse. It started like sputtering, coughing, backfiring, spitting, and then it finally just died, and I lost all power. Well, prior to that, when I first arrived at the event, I was having some issues, and the mechanic came out and helped me take a look at it, and we cleaned the battery terminals, and it seemed like it worked fine. It seemed like everything was fine again. There wasn't any issues. So then fast forward to the slow race, when I really started having more issues. So the mechanic came out again, he took a look at it, and we determined that it had to be in the ignition switch. So he gave me some brief instructions and said that that's probably what I should do, is take the ignition switch apart and clean it. That's what I did. So this morning, I pulled the battery out and I cleaned these terminals really well and put them all together. Wiped everything out here, cleaned the battery off, so there's no issues there. My cables are all good, you know, there's no connections are all good on those. I'll show you what I used on that though. Little Dremel tool, and I got a wire brush attachment on the end of it, and that works really good for, you know, cleaning small parts. You got to hang on to them pretty tight though with your finger, or stick them in the vise there, use a little towel or something so you don't nick them up. But at any rate, the first thing we had to do was pull the cowl off. And here's the cowl. It pretty much sits right on this center bolt there. And this nut that's right in the middle of the cowl, it's a 1/2 inch. You take that off, and then you just flip the cowl back. Now all your wiring is connected up right in here. So I just propped it up. I put some gloves under there, propped it up, keep it from scratching my tank too. And then the wires are holding it at this end. I didn't want to disconnect. I suppose you could disconnect everything, but I didn't want to do that at this point. Here's your ignition switch. And there's 4 little bolts that have to be removed. And yeah, they're all in there. I took those 4 bolts out, and the ignition switch comes out through the top this way. There's 3 leads here. It plugs in with this. So you pop that off, and then the switch comes off. Now, there is like a little C-clip right there that you have to take off, and then this inner plastic circle comes off to expose the leads that make these connections here. If you don't have a C-clip remover, this is real tricky. I did not have one. I used a screwdriver, a small screwdriver, and was able to pry it off of there. One thing you want to be careful of when you're removing those C-clips is they'll spring on you, and you'll lose that thing somewhere in your shop, or you know, you'll have a hard time finding it. So if you have fumbly fingers, this is not a project maybe you want to get into. You got to have a steady hand. And even then, when you disassemble the switch, there's 3 little springs in there, and those have like a floating contact that sits on top of each spring. So you pull all that stuff out, and then you can see the there's like your little panel is right down in here with your leads, so you clean those leads off. And then when you put it back together, you take this inner plastic ring with the slots in it, this piece right here, and you turn it upside down. You put all the springs back in, the 3 springs, and then you set the little contacts on top of the springs. And then the switch will go on upside down, and it has to fit in so that these little chrome pieces actually fit into the specific slots that give it the right direction. And once that's all reassembled, put it back together, and now we're going to see if it works. I'm going to plug everything back in and hit the ignition and see if that doesn't do the trick. Alright, that's tightened up. Let's see what happens. Well, I got a neutral light. And let me get some choke on here. I did it. So the contacts were all cleaned in the ignition switch. Battery terminals were cleaned, so I got a good connection all the way through. So hopefully we're going to ride this coming weekend and plan to do, I don't know, at least 100 miles or more. So I don't want any issues with this thing. So that being said, I hope that it's fixed. So this old girl is, well, next year she'll be 20 years old. So, you know, I've been trying to take good care of it, but when you got as many miles on it as this thing does, it takes some nicks and bangs. It's been through some stuff. I got a nice swing in the fender there, which I'm not very proud of. That was a trailering accident, and whenever you plan on trailering your bike or loading it up on the back of a truck, take extra precautions. Strap it down with the proper methods and don't try to jury-rig something. That's what happens. Over the years, you know, I've disassembled the carburetor and cleaned some of that stuff out because I had some problems with water getting in there at one time. Somehow I got water in the tank, condensation or something. But I ended up having to clean the carburetor, so I took that apart. I've replaced the starter before. That's quite a project. You have to, actually comes out from this side, so the whole primary cover has to come out, and then the starter slides out from this side. So I've done quite a bit of wrenching on it over the years. I like to do my own work. I hate to take it in and have somebody do it. It just gets real costly, and I hate to do that. So whenever I can work on it myself, I usually do. Well, I think my repair was successful this time. I didn't come up with any extra bolts or washers or anything like that, so that's a plus right there. And luckily I had the proper tools to do it, except for that little C-clip remover. And if you're going to do that, that's a real tiny little, you know, C-clip remover for that starter switch. So, and it's a very delicate situation, so you want to have a good work bench to work on, where you got some room. If you need glasses, you're going to need them because they're tiny little parts. You'll be able to see down in there. It's kind of an intricate job, but it's not hard to do. And this ignition switch is the original one, so it has, oh good grief, you know, 19 years of use on it. and it's getting a little sloppy. I should probably replace it and buy a new ignition for it just totally and get that done. But you know, I'm one of those guys that just keeps fixing up the old stuff. I'm trying to keep it going. So there you go, cats. If you got any questions, don't ask me. I'm no master mechanic. But I do have a good head for common sense, so that helps when you're doing mechanic work. But when you get into the major stuff, and I have completely torn down motors before, but I've never torn down this Evo, and I don't really plan on it at this point in my life. So if I had major work to do, I'd probably just take it in and have them work on it. I have had the top seals replaced a couple times because they were leaking. It was blowing oil all over, and I was getting oil blowing all down the side of the engine, back on my saddlebag. It was just spraying out of that top end. So they replaced the seals on it, and then a couple years later, it started doing the same thing. It's been quite a while since I've messed with that, and I don't have any problems with it anymore. And it usually happens when you get a really bad backfire, pow, and then it like blows those seals out. So, or at least that's what I assume happened. Anyway, that's all I got for today. Ride hard and die free.